My name is Dacia Clay. I'm the audio librarian here at Classical 91.7. While I'm a real librarian, I have a deep, dark secret. I know very little about classical music. I grew up listening to rock, and I know something about jazz. But when it comes to classical, but I really want to learn. So, every week on this show, a classical music expert will give me a piece of classical music they think I should know, and then we'll discuss it. Come learn with me in the classical classroom. Hello and welcome to the Classical Classroom. I'm Dacia Clay, and here with me, all the way from Finland, which I'm told is a place, is Alex Freeman, who is a Minnesota-based composer. He's currently living in Finland this year, where he composes by day and by night leads a rock band called Alex Freeman Pop Show. Alex studied at the Eastman School of Music and at Juilliard. He's a teacher, professor, actually. And today's show is going to be kind of different. Alex, will you explain why and what we're going to be talking about?
Yeah, we're going to talk today about a composer named Stephen Paulus, who is an American composer who we just lost recently. He passed away at the young age of 65. And like, a lot of those kinds of things, we lose a giant like that, and the musical community mourns this sort of thing, but it also gives us a chance to sort of marvel at the amazing amount that they accomplished. So there's plenty to celebrate there. So I thought we could talk about what his influence has been on the musical world, and I guess I can also say some things about what it has meant to me.
Okay, I like the sound of this, and I'm curious because when I was doing a little bit of study for this show beforehand, I was listening to some stuff on YouTube, and I just happened to scroll through some of the comments, and man, people were very sad about his passing. Like, I have never read such heartfelt comments online before. You know, usually comments are notorious for being so nasty and poorly written.
Yeah,
and these were all lovely. And
I usually don't even read them. Yeah, Facebook lit up like a Christmas tree for days. People saying, how they were sad to hear of this great loss, and there were people putting up YouTube videos of his music. Can
you tell us a little bit about who he was just as a person, when he was born, that kind of thing?
Well, he was born in New Jersey, but he really grew up in Minnesota, and I think people generally think of him as a Midwestern composer, a Minnesota composer. He certainly thought of himself as that, and he was. He was the quintessential Midwestern composer. In a way, I think on the East Coast, and I'm greatly exaggerating here, but I mean on the East Coast there was this sense of being very New York-centric, and I think my instinct about this is that there was a certain amount of revolt against that was behind the sort of the energy behind Stephen Paulus and his good friend Libby Larsen, who's also one of the people who really created the scene in the middle of the country at a time where everything that happened in L.A. or New York, and they sort of had this idea that, well, you can be a composer anywhere, and why don't we make something happen here? And it's a great gift they gave, because as citizens, and I guess when I think about Stephen Paulus, I think about the gigantic catalog of works that he left, but also the really great citizen he was for other composers. He and Libby, with a very small grant of something like, I think it was like $400, they started a Minnesota Composers Forum, which eventually became the American Composers Forum, which now has 2,000 members, represented in 18 countries. It awards $12.4 million in commissions and grants every year.
Wow.
It generates $1 million in royalties for recordings by its record label, Innova. And it has a lot of programs that are great resources for young composers and great resources for composers working professionally. It's a tremendous legacy.
Yeah. You said something a second ago that I was curious about. You called him the quintessential Midwestern composer and compared that to, like a New York or an LA composer. So what's the difference? Is it a different sound, a different sensibility?
When I think of him as a Midwestern composer, I think much more about, not so much about the music as I think about the idea of sort of taking ownership of your own career as a composer and not relying on some sort of validation from outside. I think you could be a Midwestern composer anywhere in the country in that sense.
Right.
And I think Stephen was really he's the example of a composer who was frustrated with the big publishing companies and decided, you can manage your own catalog, and if you really put all of your energy into it, you can control your own destiny as a composer. And he did this spectacularly. At any given time, he had 30 or 40 commissions lined up, and he was always working.
So he sounds like a trailblazer, like he was fiercely independent and didn't ask for anybody's validation, and he just kind of did his own thing and said, there you go.
That would be accurate. I think what I was struck by about this, looking at the scene now, is that he was kind of maybe indie before there was indie. I mean, he built his own scene, and that sort of became the scene.
Yeah.
So, but what Stephen really is known for, I mean, he wrote more than 400 choral pieces. He wrote lots and lots of vocal music, and he wrote, I think, 13 operas. Vocal music is really where he was at, and I guess I think the Violin Concerto is highly lyrical in a very vocal sort of way. It's maybe one of the reasons it appeals. But I think really a great short piece that I think gives you a little bit of everything about his artistry as a setter of text is that very famous piece of his, the Pilgrims Hymn, which I think was on your syllabus.
Yes, that was on my homework list.
Yes, and what did you learn about the Pilgrims Hymn?
I didn't learn a lot, but I listened to it, and I don't know a lot about choral music at all. And I don't mean this to sound offensive. It's clearly I have an untrained ear, but it all kind of sounds the same to me.
Okay.
And
all right.
It sounded like lovely choral music to me.
Well, it is lovely choral music, and I think I can make a few observations about how that music relates to its text, and see if in the second listening we hear maybe there's a dynamic relationship between text and music that could emerge.
Okay. All right.
So why don't we try that? Let's give a listen to maybe the first half of this.
Okay.
Okay, so I mean it's a hymn, which I suppose has some kind of an association for most people, right?
Yeah, sure. Think about going to my grandparents' church.
Sure, and this is a religious song. It's at the end of an opera that's actually based on a Tolstoy story. But it's about these three, I think they're monks. Naturally, this is about prayer and that sort of thing. And the text is, let's see, even before we call on thy name to ask you, O God, when we seek for your words to glorify you, you hear our prayer. Unceasing love, O unceasing love, surpassing all we know. Glory to the Father and the Son and to the Holy Spirit. Right. Now, there are a lot of ways you could set that text, and some of them would emphasize different things in that text. But Stephen, I think, made some decisions that are pretty easy to hear, I think, even if you don't have degrees in music. First of all, as a hymn, they're all singing rhythmically the same. You don't hear any voices singing different rhythms from other voices, right?
Right.
Rhythmically, they're in lockstep, and the word we can use for that is homophonic, meaning as opposed to polyphonic. I think maybe in some of your other shows there was probably these words have popped up somewhere, at least polyphonic has. Yeah, so you don't have independent musical lines. You have all the voices singing the same rhythm at the same time. And that reflects something of these singers all being of the same mind, of having the same plea. It reflects that. And then there's a short break after the words, you hear our prayer. Unceasing love, oh unceasing love. And this here the music is emphasizing the grammar of the words. That there's basically a semicolon in the music. This pause is saying, you hear our prayer.
Right.
And so what you naturally expect to hear is now that prayer. This is a kind of a dynamic underpinning of how those words work grammatically. You hear our prayer. And then the prayer, I mean, these are beautiful words. And I think what's wonderful about this is that if you have religious affinities, this will resonate with you a certain way. If you don't, there's nothing more sort of ubiquitously spiritual than unceasing love. Oh, unceasing love. It's kind of heartbreaking. I mean, it's wonderful. Right. I think it takes it completely out of the context of a mere, religious hymn. It's something more universal than that somehow.
Right, it's a little more heightened than your traditional hymn that's very religion-specific.
Exactly. Yeah. And I guess you could argue the flip side, that religion's, its richness isn't that it is metaphor for all those same things. But anyway, that maybe, I'm getting out of my depth here. Yeah, I think you want to take that up with Tolstoy.
Okay, but, I'll do that later.
In any case... So musically, the words are framed in such a way as we hear the grammar.
Yeah.
And I think second time around you'll notice this. And the next thing I would really like you to hear the next time around, after we get through unceasing love, oh unceasing love, the next words, surpassing all we know. Now, there's a big harmonic shift here, and those are very technical words to use, but I think anyone will hear this. Okay. The harmony changes in a surprising way. You have this. It's almost like this new world opens up harmonically. We have these new chords that we haven't heard in any other part of the song up to this point. And that coincides with the voices reaching their highest pitches in the song. And surpassing all we know, the idea of that this is something beyond our understanding.
Right, and that sort of symbolized in the complexity of the harmonics.
The harmony steps out of the... and since we're in a classroom, I'll have to correct you there. Harmonics, that's a whole other thing. What we're talking about is harmony. Harmonics has to do with the overtone series, and it might be something we could discuss in another show. But anyway, I would be remiss if I let that pass as your teacher. Anyway, But the change in harmony and the reaching outwards of the higher voices, it all serves to emphasize that aspect of the text. And we hear, we get a sense of something, a sense of wonder in this sudden shift in harmony. And this is, I think this is very, very perceptible. I think even people who don't know they notice this. So
he's illuminating this text, which in and of itself is lovely, but like he's giving it another dimension.
Well, that's a wonderful word you used, illuminating, because that's illuminating in the way that that those monks copying old manuscripts and
the illuminated text.
Yeah. So in a way, that's really what's happening. But also the pun is also good. That there's also this sort of enlightening of us of what these words can bring to us. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I think you can probably notice is that at the very end, in the very last note of the phrase, you'll notice that it sounds like they're all singing one note.
Okay.
And that is at the end of glory to the Father and to the Son and the Holy Spirit. So what we have there is the Trinity, this sort of 3-in-1 idea. Uh-huh. And he really musically paints that idea that
that's neat.
Yeah, you have this these triadic harmonies, and these chords mostly have 3 notes, and now we're suddenly in unison with 1 note. These are subtle things that you don't necessarily pick up the first time you hear it. But one of the things that I think is great about Stephen's music is that it always invites you to come back. So I'm kind of hoping that we're having that experience in real time here, because it's a lot to maybe get your brain around in one listening, but there are 4 things we're going to try to hear this time. We're going to think about the fact that this is a hymn, that they're all moving rhythmically at the same time. Okay. We're going to listen for that grammatical underpinning, that pause that sets up. Okay, here comes the prayer. Now here's the prayer. Unceasing love. Unceasing love. Okay, and then we're going to listen for this surprising harmonic thing that he does here in surpassing all we know. Mm-hmm. And this sense of wonder and this sort of door that opens up underneath you as these new harmonies unfold, these new notes you haven't heard. Uh-huh. And then I'm sure we're gonna hear this depiction of the Trinity, the 3-in-1, at the very end as a unison. So let's give it another listen and see if you get all of those things.
All right, I'm waiting to have my mind blown right now. So I heard some of it.
Okay.
I heard some of it. And it was neat. It's very subtle, though. I think that when you were talking about it, I was like, oh, wow, that's, first of all, the fact that he based the text on a Tolstoy story, I think that's really cool. I've never heard of a hymn being based on like a work of fiction.
Well, the opera tells the story, and it's about these 3 old hermits, and they're very they're
hermit-like.
Yeah, they're very hermit-like, and they're very religious, and they have a certain kind of faith. But this very educated bishop tries to teach them the Lord's Prayer, and he tries to teach them the words, and he's not sure the next day when he leaves that they'll remember it, but they're leaving on a boat, and they get some distance from the island, and they realize that they're being followed, and it turns out these 3 hermits are running across the water as though it were dry land, and they say, "We have forgotten of your teaching, as long as we kept repeating it, we remembered it, but we stopped saying it, and a word dropped out, and we don't remember anything of it. Teach us again. But of course, they're walking on water.
Right. Oh, Tolstoy's so awesome.
So the bishop is kind of embarrassed, and he's like, yeah, you know what? Your own prayer is good enough.
You're good. You're good.
You're good.
Just keep doing that thing.
Anyway, it's in that vein. So, and this little hymn ends that opera. In a way, it's intended to be a very earnest, simple statement of faith.
Yeah.
So, again, I think it's nice that it's not laden with all sorts of bells and whistles and tricks that the composers do. And you're right; these are subtleties. I may have overstated the grammatical end of it. I realize that there are a couple of other pauses in there that might have been confusing if you didn't have the words in front of you, but...
No, but I mean, I think like all of those are really cool things to point out. But what I was going to say is that like I think that maybe a very small number of listeners would know that was sort of lurking in the music. I think that it's like so subtle, and maybe I'm wrong because I'm not a person who listens to a lot of choral music.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe people who are big choral music fans are hearing that without any prompting. But yeah, it seems so subtle that it's like, unless you know about it before you listen.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the loveliness, and I think the mystery of the loveliness unfolds the more you listen to it. I mean, this is only your maybe second time going through this. But as you said, the first time you heard it, you're like, well, that's lovely, and probably you wouldn't mind hearing it again.
But this time it was more interesting. I will say that it was more like distinguished from other choral music in my brain because of its backstory. You know?
And just imagine there's an infinite number of these kinds of things that composers do to subliminally make you interested in what you're hearing, and sometimes not so subliminally to make you interested in what you're hearing.
Uh-huh. Wow. It's really pretty, that amen at the end.
Yeah.
Like the way that is. It asks for close listening. I think this is music that really asks for you to pay very close attention to it. That is less for the passive listener, less for the casual listener. This is definitely that kind of music, I think.
Well, I would even argue that this is so lovely that you could listen to this over and over again, and maybe if you weren't listening carefully, you might not notice all this stuff, but I think subliminally maybe you notice this stuff. I mean, that's why you're interested in hearing it again, but it's the kind of thing that might occur to you at some point that, wow, hey, we're talking about, eternity here, and suddenly it sounds really different. The music sounds different somehow. I can't put my finger on it. I mean, I can tell you, I think it's flat 3, but that doesn't mean anything.
Right. We should hear some of the violin concerto.
Okay. Yeah. This violin concerto I got to know pretty early on as a composer, and as a student at Eastman, and it was new music that offered some recognizable things for a young composer and a casual listener, but it was also, there were these fresh timbres and distinctive individual harmonic things happening, and of course it was exquisitely crafted for the orchestra. And I was keenly aware that I was hearing everything I was learning from Samuel Adler about melody at the time, and from Christopher Rouse about orchestration. I was hearing all of those things put to expert use from beginning to end. But I heard a kindred spirit somewhere in that music. But I think at the time it was just about the right piece for me to hear. And I think most composers I know of my generation probably have that CD, the Atlanta Symphony with Bill Prusel playing violin. It's probably the recording you have.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's got Rothko's Yellow Band.
Oh, Rothko.
Yeah, it's real you can see it from halfway across the room, and I saw it in many, many CD collections back when people still collected CDs, and CDs were expensive in those days, and we were students, so you really had to commit if you were going to buy them. Although I think I actually got my copy for free. The director of the Eastman School gave it to me. I think I was being reprimanded for something, and I was in his office, and I think he thought I felt bad, so he gave me a couple of free CDs.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it was nice. But yeah, so I had this CD, and I went to my room, and I listened to it, and I thought, wow, this is great. And it was, from that point on, Paulus was on my radar. So the violin concerto was important to me in that way. And, we all watched him manage his career in a way that is really, like I said, a roadmap for composers now in a lot of ways. I think he'll always be an inspiration to all of us in that way.
Yeah.
But let's see. I'll go back to something Libby Larsen said. She said, the thing I admire most about Stephen is Stephen Paulus, the composer. All the traits that made Steve are present in his music. His music is layered in meaning. It invites you to return to it, and when you do, there's always something deeper, richer, delightful to discover, as we said before. But I'll continue now. I admire his ability to compose a beautifully constructed lyric line. It's maddeningly difficult to create a highly original and memorable lyric line. At this, Stephen is one of the best. His musical signatures, quick rhythmic bursts, elegant uses of minimal percussion, a well-placed chord which resolves in an unexpected and highly emotional way, and of course his masterful ways with text setting make his music his and his alone. She goes on, in his music, Stephen met his goal, to be authentic. His music lasts, and it will for many years to come. There are few of these things that are readily apparent at the beginning of this concerto. This memorable lyric line and this kind of minimal percussion gestures and these interesting harmonic things. I think we can hear all of them right at the beginning of this piece.
Wow. Okay.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
That's
so,
I have a confession to make. I did not totally do my homework.
Okay.
But not because I didn't try. I actually was looking around online trying to find the first violin concerto, but I could not find it anywhere. So instead, I listened to an organ concerto by Stephen Paulus.
Okay.
So, and the reason that I bring that up is because when I heard it, like I listened to the Pilgrims, what was it called? The Pilgrims Hymn?
Pilgrims Hymn, yeah.
I listened to that first, and then I heard that organ concerto, and I was like, this has to be a different Paulus. This can't be the same guy. I must be listening to the wrong music. And then I continued to sort of poke around and look for this violin concerto. I was just kind of blown away by how different, like it went, like the Pilgrims Hymn is just this sort of lovely, soothing kind of piece of music, and while the organ concerto and this have all of this dissonance and like these crazy patterns, it has a lot of urgency, I guess. And I was like kind of really surprised that those two things came out of the same person. Yeah.
Well, this, I think Paulus approached the concerto in that sort of neo-romantic way. It was very much this sense of the soloist is sort of either hero or protagonist or antagonist or something. I mean, it's there's a struggle there usually when there's a concerto, in this piece for sure you get that sense that there's a dialogue, but there's certainly the violin is is committing a heroic feat, and it's but it's also highly virtuosic. I mean, that's an important aspect of it, that it's designed to show what a performer can do.
Right.
So it in that sense it shouldn't be easy. I mean, I guess this kind of goes way back to Paganini or something, that this idea that you advance the art form through
making really, really hard music to play.
Technical innovation, right? And 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 of course, that idea was perfect for romantic composers, because the lone individual hero is a very romantic idea. Concerto is a great metaphor for that, and I feel like there was always a neo-romantic streak especially in that kind of concerto writing, and in this piece in particular. I mean, violin concertos are big pieces for composers in the last 150 years or so. I mean, they're before that, in the classical era, you wrote many of them, but romantic and modern composers don't tend to write several of them. I mean, it's unusual that Stephen wrote 3, but the big ones like the Brahms Concerto, that's a struggle. That's a life and death struggle, that piece, The Beethoven Violin Concerto, they wrote 1. I mean, it was just sort of like, that was your statement. You wrote a violin concerto, and it was... And when you hear it, it's gigantic, and it's, you can understand why maybe I didn't write 20 of these things while I was,
That's funny, because I've always kind of wondered why people, when they're talking about, the Mendelssohn or whatever, they just say whatever it is that they're talking about, and I'm like, there's just the one? Why?
Right. Yeah, they don't say the Mozart Violin Concerto because there are more of them. But of course, that's not a hard and fast rule. Prokofiev wrote a few of them, and they're...
So this Paulus, he was a fierce composer.
Yeah, and I think you get a sense maybe he was writing in the shadow of those other great violin concertos, and the great 20th century concertos, the Stravinsky Violin Concerto, the Berg Violin Concerto. Schoenberg wrote one. I mean, these are usually a pretty major statement.
Yeah.
And so this is Stephen Paulus's Violin Concerto, and yeah, it's heroic, it's gigantic, and it sounds like, well, where's this going to go? It asks a big question at the beginning, and it's going to take some time to answer that big question. It's going to take a couple of movements, and there's going to be some struggle. But I think in that opening passage we just listened to, we hear very clear melodic lyrical gestures. Doodle-dee, doodle-doo, doodle-doo, doodle-doo. I'm not singing the right notes, but I mean the gesture is quite recognizable, and when it comes back, you remember it. I mean, even if it sounds complicated, this is a very memorable melodic idea. And we hear very clear roles. We hear the orchestra has an accompanimental role at the beginning. Even, there's a lot of noise going on there, but there's no question the orchestra is setting a gigantic cavernous landscape for this violin hero to wander through and go on his journey of discovery. But we also hear all sorts of great things, just technically, in the orchestra, these great textures, these kinds of sound masses of, just this kind of noodling filigree in the woodwinds, and there's almost a dialogue between the violin and the clarinet that just kind of, these fast 16th note figures are really, there's a lot of motor rhythm there, and it's very, very, pulse driven and very exciting, but also very lyrical.
Yeah.
You hear the there's a back and forth between the orchestra and the violin, but there are these things you can really hear where Stephen is thinking about the timbre of those wood blocks. They're in a kind of a percussive high pitched area, and it kind of matches the sound of the staccato violin on those open strings, and so you really get this wonderful sounding effect of the orchestra and the violin really, really connecting, and then suddenly splitting apart again, so that you really hear the struggle again between the two.
Yeah.
I'm kind of making broad statements here, but
that's okay. I think that's perfect.
But this there's a drama in this that I think is very, very compelling. And this is compared to the Pilgrims Hymn, this is much, much more advanced music.
Yeah.
You may not walk out and be able to sing the thing from beginning to end, but I think you walk out thinking, wow, I'd really like to hear that again.
Yeah, there's a lot to digest. Like this. I think it would probably be impossible to to digest it all at once.
It's a thrilling piece, and it follows that pattern. You have a kind of a fast movement and a slow movement in the middle, and a kind of a fast, very, very virtuosic movement with all sorts of technical tricks in the violin, left hand pizzicato, and all sorts of fun things. And you get the sense that you've really gone on a journey at the end of this piece, and it all comes out okay in the end.
Yeah.
But I think this is a really good. I don't think it's the first piece people think of when they think of Stephen Paulus, but it was my first piece. So when all of us composers have their own story about some way in which Stephen Paulus's career or music touched us or helped push us along at just the right point. Mm-hmm. But this is it was a very sad day, but it's also it's a time where I think a lot of us have spent reflecting on what he gave all of us.
So personally, what did you gather from Paulus? Like, how are you inspired by him? Well,
I think the best way I can answer that is that some of this music I really love very much. But I think what's really remarkable and what I feel like I've reflected on a lot in the last month is the degree to which his whole career is like a beacon to composers everywhere. This was a guy who had limitless energy, a fierce work ethic, and confidence in what he was doing. Confidence that his gift for composing deserved everything he put behind it, and confidence that music making, his and anyone's who took music seriously or just found joy in music, mattered and could make a difference. He represented a kind of template of how a composer can take his or her career into their own hands, find their audience, find their congregation, and have a fulfilling, vibrant life in music. He had limitless energy for supporting his colleagues and students and the whole musical community. The composer, the entrepreneur, the citizen of the musical world. You can't find many who operated on all those fronts at such a high level. And I think for me and for a lot of composers, beyond whatever musical influence we might have gotten from Stephen, his life and his career are just a shining example of what you can do if you just really put yourself into it.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's pretty inspiring. I am inspired by your inspiration.
Wow, okay.
That's kind of a lot to take away from one person, like that says something about the kind of guy he was.
Yeah, I think it's a great loss. There's nowhere to replace that. I mean, of course, we'll all be plagued by what, he was only 65. I mean, in 20 more years, he could have written another 200 works, more than that maybe. But I think we have to be grateful for what we have. And, the real value of reflecting on it can't be calculated.
Well, it seems like Stephen Paulus was remarkable in a lot of ways. And I really appreciate you introducing me to his music. Sad that he's not still producing more, and it has been great to talk to you. What time is it in Finland?
It's about 8:45
at night.
Yeah.
Man. Okay. Also, I forgot to ask you if you could say anything to us in Finnish before we go. To finish off the show.
Oh, that's you are the first person to make that pun.
I know. I'm so original.
No, mitä mä voin sanoa? Kiitos ja hyvää yötä ja hyvää päivän jatkoa.
What did you say?
You'll never know. No, I said, what can I say? Thank you and good night, or actually, for you, have a nice rest of your day.
Nice, awesome. Well, Alex Freeman, thank you very much for coming onto the Classical Classroom and teaching me about Stephen Paulus. I really appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Well, I thank you. I hope I was coherent.
You were totally coherent. All right, everybody, that's about it for this episode of Classical Classroom. For more Classroom, go to houstonpublicmedia.org/classroom. There you will find more links to Classical Classroom related things than you can shake a stick at. It's got our social media links, how to listen to us, which, in addition to iTunes and SoundCloud, now include Stitcher and TuneIn smartphone apps available for you out there. If you have questions, concerns, or comments, email me at dclay@houstonpublicmedia.org. Thanks today to audio producer Todd Tastee Freez Hulslander for making us sound so nice. Thanks to program director St. John Flynn for finally watching 30 Rock as I had recommended for so long and realizing that I am lemon to his Donaghy. Thanks to Alex Freeman for staying up until all hours of the night in Finland to be on the show. Thanks to me for saying words, but most of all, thanks to you for listening. We'll catch you next time. Okay, sorry you guys, we just could not resist putting this in. Sometimes at the end of our Classical Classroom episodes, a guest who's recording from another location will forget to turn off their recording device, and sometimes in those moments we learn special things about our guests. In this instance, we learned that Alex Freeman does a really spot-on Forrest Gump.
All right. I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is, Jenny.